America and Saudi Arabia are said to have intensified negotiations over arms deals potentially worth billions of dollars. It's claimed the agreements go way beyond any deal brokered during the Obama administration, with Washington and Riyadh in talks over state-of-the-art equipment and technology. Saudi Arabia is said to be the first stop on President Donald Trump's maiden foreign trip since taking office to help seal these trade deals.
Sources have said the arms package includes a high-altitude defence missile system from Lockheed Martin, similar to the one being made operational in South Korea. The countries have also been negotiating over a software system and a package of satellite capabilities, also provided by Lockheed. The Bradley fighting vehicle and M109 artillery vehicle manufactured by BAE Systems plc could also be included in the package, sources told Reuters. It would be the first time the US has sold a new small surface warship to a foreign country in decades. Relations between the two allies became strained after former President Barack Obama signed a nuclear peace deal with Iran. But the strain now lies with Congress, as it considers if these deals would cost Israel its regional military edge. Politicians and public are also worried about civilian casualties in Yemen. The State Department website claims that Saudi Arabia's human rights record has remained poor, with men, women and children in Yemen continuing to suffer and die.
Does Saudi Arabia's huge military spending worry the American public? And does Washington really want to address the problem of international terrorism? Simple questions with important answers. Now, Trump is selling heavy artillery to Saudi Arabia despite its widely condemned bombing campaign against the people of Yemen. Does the American public think Trump cares about Yemenis? We asked them.
I think Trump has a big job, and I think he's just starting to understand what that big job is. So the details of carrying at that level probably hard to get to right now.
In that case, no. I think his bombing, his purchasing high military is poor, and it's poor for the people of the world.
He just want to make sure that all his family is very well taken care of, while people like you and me, we have to suffer, go through the war, and be in poverty.
I think Trump has given the persona that he doesn't really care about anyone who's not an American citizen.
Yes, I do. There's just a great concern, I think, about the Yemenis and the situation in Yemen.
Yeah.
He does?
Well, yeah, and I think part of the difficulty from our standpoint is that the situation in the Middle East is so complex because there's so many, outside people participating on how many sides? I mean, 4, 5, 6, not just 2, you know. So because somebody does this doesn't mean necessarily that they're against this or for this.
Well, the American deal with Saudi Arabia now is reaching close to $100 billion and is expected over the next decade to reach somewhere around $300 billion for arms sales. And to say that Trump cares about Yemenis or indeed any other human rights abuses is frankly a laughable notion, because this is the same country that's involved in bombing people via drones and killing innocent people in Afghanistan. The number of people that they've killed in Iraq is huge, and to consider that Trump would be put off selling weapons to Saudi Arabia simply because of the plight of the Yemenis is just a ridiculous idea. Trump and indeed America has a long-standing strategic relationship with Saudi Arabia, and that arms deals is a core part of that relationship, and that will continue regardless of what Saudi Arabia does with those arms.
The only thing that Donald Trump cares about are the interests of America, both financially and geostrategically. So it's not surprising to me that he has no qualms continuing to sell weapons to this Saudi regime. I think that as a steadfast ally of Saudi Arabia, America will continue to support them both financially and politically, no matter what the cost is, no matter what the human cost is in Yemen. I think if Donald Trump truly cared about the people of Yemen, without paying any lip service like a lot of presidents have done before, then he would cease weapon sales to Saudi Arabia. But instead, like presidents before him, he's chosen American hegemony over a chance of peace in the region.
Trump wants to make America great again. Does he plan to do this by selling weapons to some of the world's most tyrannical states? Here's what the American public thought.
Well, I think he's misguided in many ways, and I think that's not a way that's going to make America great again.
Well, he's selling weapons because that's the way how Americans gonna make some money by doing war, and that's the tragedy of that's how the United States works by doing wars between each other. Country like your country, my country, they can kill each other while United States sell weapons, and then citizens like you and me can die for them.
Gosh, I don't even know if he knows what he's doing when he's selling weapons there. I mean, I have a feeling that is more influenced by lobbyists from the defense industry. But it's certainly concerning.
No, I think he believes he's making America great again when really he's just making the persona of America worse than it was, and he's trying to reverse everything that Obama has tried to put in place with peace with these countries, and he's just making it worse.
I think Trump will make America great as long as it fills his pockets.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated thing in the world of, the bigger picture of what's going on. So obviously I think each country is going to think of themselves first. So Saudi Arabia, Yemen are going to do that. So with that in mind, each country is going to do that for themselves, but then hopefully we're looking at the bigger picture of trying to help each other out.
No. I think we are amongst a number of nations in the world that have been selling weapons to lots of countries throughout history.
Well, making America great again is a great slogan, but it's not a policy. It's a system that's been working well for the Americans so far, which is to sell masses of weapons to regimes with not just questionable human rights records, but terrible human rights records. I mean, this is the same country which sold chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. This is the same country that sold weapons to dictators like Hosni Mubarak for years and years and years. This is the same country that sells weapons to Israel. And to say that making America great again by not selling weapons to them is just an anathema. They will continue doing this because America has the largest military-industrial complex in the world. They have the largest collection of weapons in the world, and they have the largest arms sales in the world as well.
Well, I guess that depends on your definition of great. Donald Trump's definition of great, maybe so. I think it's common that one of the main motivators for the despicable political relationship that a lot of Western countries have with Saudi Arabia, the main motivator really is influence in the Middle East. So by continuing to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump is technically amplifying American power in the region. Now, in my opinion, the people of Yemen's opinion, no, he's not making America great again at all. He's just keeping things the same like they have been for the past 2 decades. A cozy relationship with Saudi Arabia. If anything, it's make America selfish again.
Saudi Arabia is the 4th biggest spender on military weapons in the world. Are the American public worried about this fact?
Not really. I mean, I think unfortunately that the arms race, hopefully is more about keeping peace around the world than using the arms to gain.
Yes, I am. I'm worried about any country that is the biggest spender on military weapons.
Yeah, because if it's like you provoke anyone, of course they have to defend itself. If the United States is going to start to provoke them, obviously everybody is going to get hurt. It doesn't matter what country, what religion, everybody's going to get hurt if anyone will be using their power.
Not any more than anywhere else.
I would be worried about this fact because I don't think America and Saudi Arabia have the best relations, and I think that needs to change because we all need to work together as as countries so that we can fight groups that are trying to take over the world. And
Saudi, no, I'm not worried about Saudi Arabia. Worried about other countries, not Saudi Arabia. Worried about Yemen and Syria and Iraq and all this other ones. Syria, not so much Saudi Arabia.
I don't know a lot about Saudi Arabia's military activity. I think that they should be maybe helping other countries that that they support a little bit more.
No, I think they're very self-protecting as opposed to a warlike against other nations.
It is indeed very worrying that Saudi Arabia, a country which is characterized as not only the ideological fountainhead of much of the terrorism that's coming out of the Muslim world, but it's closely linked to that. So a lot of the terrorism that's happening is to do with the foreign policy of the West, but it's also linked intrinsically to this Wahhabist extremist ideology that is propounded by Saudi Arabia so much. And the fact that Saudi Arabia is one of the largest importers of weapons and sits on a massive arsenal of weapons is very worrying indeed, because this is a country that has no legitimacy of its own. The regime of Saudi Arabia, the royal family, has no legitimacy. It behaves like Israel does. It needs the support, external support of the United States, of the West, and that includes the military and diplomatic support as well as political support to exist as a regime. Without that, Saudi Arabia has not managed to put down its roots in the region as it should have done if it was a natural occurrence. This is a foreign imposed regime in that region, much like Israel is, and it needs that support, and that's why it's gathering this massive arsenal of weapons. And it's been a massive policy failure. If you look at Yemen, if you look at Iraq, if you look at Syria, it's a massive policy failure for Saudi Arabia that's been in existence for about 85 years now, 86 years. It's a massive policy failure that all these countries, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, all neighbors, they have a massive problem with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has not been able to get along with them. Saudi Arabia has not shared the fruits of its success with these countries. And now Saudi Arabia is stuck with neighbors who are vehemently against Saudi Arabia and against Saudi interests. So one must question the Saudi political sense as well. Where is the leadership? Where is the policy that would help secure Saudi Arabia's future? Instead, it's put Saudi Arabia in a lot of danger by surrounding itself by enemies, effectively. And it's created those enemies by its own policies of neglect, its own policies of hatred, its own policies of domination, its own policies of not sharing its wealth.
Of course, it is really, really deeply worrying that such an oppressive state is one of the highest military spenders in the world. But what I think is just as worrying is the intensely relaxed attitude that countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom have towards selling Saudi Arabia these weapons. They wouldn't be the biggest military spenders or one of the biggest military spenders in the world if they actually had, well, if they didn't have anybody to buy off in the first place. And I think that's going to be a legacy of many, many Western countries when we look back on this period over the next kind of 20 or 30 years. Their complete subservience to such an oppressive regime in Saudi Arabia, especially considering the conflict in Yemen right now, is going to be a damning indictment of them in the future.
It's claimed over $1 billion worth of US munitions, including armor-piercing Penetrator Warheads and Paveway laser-guided bombs made by the Raytheon Co, are being sold to Saudi Arabia. Another contract includes 4 multi-mission surface combat ships, costing $11.5 billion. Yet Human Rights Watch recently counted 81 attacks from the Saudi-led coalition which violate the laws of war, including attacks on hospitals, markets, schools and religious centres.
The United States preaches to countries like Syria about human rights abuses. but stays quiet as Saudi Arabia destroys Yemen. Why? We asked the American public.
First of all, I think that if you go around the world, there's so much strife, there's so much to do, there's so much to make better.
Because the United States is and has been very two-faced about who they support and who they care about, and it's very much tied to money and control. And I feel very, very bad about what's happening in the Middle East, in Syria, in Yemen.
He does not like anyone. Doesn't matter what. It could be Yemen, Afghani, or it doesn't matter where you're from. He just does not like no one. And besides, he's against Muslim and against Spanish.
I think we're not focused on peace issues worldwide. We're focused on violence, so negativity.
I mean, the obvious answer is because of the oil and all the benefits we get from our friendship with Saudi Arabia, which is disgusting.
I think America picks and chooses who they want to fight for, and I think they want to stick with American human rights and focus on that when really they should be focusing on world human rights.
Because of our history of purchasing oil from Saudi Arabia?
I don't know. I've always found it's frustrating trying to judge other people. I mean, each country is going to do their own thing. So I don't know. I don't get that part, no matter what country you are. Yeah, how do you focus on one person's, one other country's, ways of dealing with things and then ignoring others? You're either going to do it, you got to be 100%, or just kind of stay out of it.
I think that's probably politically and tactfully, there's reasons behind that.
For the most part, it's not a cut and dry war against them and they're against them. We have so many competing things historically and religiously that it's pretty difficult, at least from my perspective, to say who's at fault for this, who's at fault for that, who should do this, who should do that.
So Saudi Arabia is effectively surrounded itself by enemies, and it's a very unfortunate situation for them. Now, as far as the human rights abuses go, it's irrelevant because the Saudis are the strategic ally of the United States and they must be protected at almost any cost. This will eventually, in my opinion, come back to bite them, because all these human rights abuses that they are carrying out now, in the UK media, there's great awareness of this. And even the UK Prime Minister is being questioned on this topic of, why are you selling so many arms to Saudi Arabia because of, look at what they're doing in Yemen. So eventually the public opinion is turning against Saudi Arabia, and eventually this will be used as a stick to beat Saudi Arabia. And we have to be careful because there has to be a change in the policy of Saudi Arabia. But if we pursue regime change as we've done in Iraq and Syria and Libya, then you don't want to end up in a situation like that in a country like Saudi Arabia, which is literally in the center of the region. That will be devastating for the entire region, more so than what's going on right now. So it's a balance that needs to be achieved. And it's very difficult to do that because the Saudis don't seem to be understanding the predicament that they're in.
Well, it's clearly a huge double standard. The simple answer is that the US wants to see regime change in Syria, so it's in their interest to target Assad by highlighting the atrocities that are going on in Syria at the moment. But anyone can see that it's just a huge hypocrisy. Saudi Arabia is one of the most oppressive countries on this planet. They execute somebody every 2 days. A lot of pro-democracy advocates included in that. And I think if you looked at the American mainstream media coverage and the amount of column inches dedicated to the atrocities in Syria, compared to the human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, you would see that there is a clear systemic bias there. And the only two words to explain the reasons behind that are money and power.
Many experts consider Saudi Arabia to be the state power behind groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda. Yet Saudi Arabia remains amongst the United States' closest allies. Does the US really care about fighting terrorism? the public said this.
I think the things we do show that maybe we're not caring about global terrorism in the way that's going to be effective to actually controlling, and none of us want terrorism in our countries or in the world, but I think unfortunately the government can be very two-faced, saying one thing and doing another.
They do care in a certain way, but they're not doing the right thing, because all what they're doing is getting all the Muslim, train them, and then Muslim turn around and then mess it up, because somehow behind the doors, I don't know what kind of deal they do between each other, and at the end they start killing each other, and then they say they're terrorists. They're American terrorists, American, Spanish, Muslim, is around the world. So, and if Saudi, they are protecting the terrorists. Over here, the government is protecting to themselves while they're stealing money from citizens like you and me.
I don't think the U.S. with Trump in power knows what they're doing.
I don't know. I mean, I think the people behind policies that would be friendly with Syria are likely not in agreement that Saudi Arabia is funding ISIS.
I think that it matters to a lot of people. I think our country's very divided right now. And I think it depends on who you ask. I am concerned, yes.
Oh yeah, I think so. Again, I think it's just one of those really complicated things. One time you think a country's your ally, and then the next decade they're your enemy. So it's just complicated and difficult. So.
I think Saudi Arabia's involvement in fighting terrorism really needs to be questioned, especially after 9/11. I think that clearly Saudis were involved in that, and that hasn't been investigated.
We think we're doing, anyway, what we can from this distance and given the complexity to try and help some people do something about terrorism.
Well, the US says it's fighting a war on terror, but the fact is, since they've started this war on terror, terrorism has increased exponentially, so it's basically a failure. You can't fight a war on terror when you're not willing to fix the basic policy issues that are the root cause of this. So America's not interested in fighting a war on terror. America's interested in creating a security complex where you have to create a problem and then go and resolve it. And that also helps selling arms in terms of the military-industrial complex. That also helps in achieving strategic goals like building bases and a long-term military presence for future wars, which they expect to fight. So all of this comes together, and Saudi Arabia bombing Yemen or being in collusion with ISIS or Al-Qaeda in Syria is neither here nor there. It's part of the plan. It's part of this greater plan to support Israel to achieve strategic goals and to build military bases with long-term objectives in mind.
Well, clearly not. It is entirely right to say that the ideology, the finances, and the cheerleaders of groups like ISIL, a lot of them do stem from Saudi Arabia. That isn't an opinion. I think that's just an indisputable fact. America are shooting themselves in the foot here, along with the rest of the world, while they're at it. But the American system, the political and economic system, it dictates that you should put profit over people. So as long as Saudi Arabia continues to be the most profitable ally for the United States in the Middle East, then there's no reason for them to stop. So all they're going to be doing is just glossing over the fact that Saudi Arabia are actually exacerbating the problem which they're trying to fight.
Trump repeatedly made promises during his presidential campaign to create manufacturing jobs in the US. After Obama halted the sale of precision-guided munitions to Saudi Arabia over concerns that the Royal Saudi Air Force was targeting civilians in Yemen, the policy was reversed after Trump took office.
Washington's armaments deals with Saudi Arabia means the US is complicit in the Saudi bombing campaign in Yemen as it continues to support Saudi Arabia's military actions there. This is a campaign which has already claimed the lives of thousands of Yemeni civilians. With America's help, it's set to claim many more.